The Third Life of Margarita by Claire Coffey.
Mar! The stand shook with the roar. Go! 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 The girl in the blue corner of the cage heard neither the announcer nor the crowd. All she saw was her opponent. The other woman was breathing hard, hands dropping for just a second. Enough. Step, slip, left, right. Her opponent went down to her knees. The referee jumped between them instantly. Stop! Fight's over! The arena exploded into applause. Mar! Go! 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 The winner is Mar! Go! She only nodded. No smile, no raised fists, as if she'd simply finished another day at the office. Her coach, standing by the cage, raised his fist out of habit, waiting for even a glance in return. She didn't look back. She was already walking to the exit, as if the victory ended not to the roar of the crowd, but behind the locker room door. The locker room was quiet. Margot slowly peeled off her gloves. A dark bruise was already blooming on her right cheekbone. She pressed an ice pack to it and stared silently into the mirror for a few minutes. This face was only needed until she left the arena. In a few minutes, it would have to disappear. She opened her makeup bag. Concealer, powder. She undid dozens of tight braids. Dark hair fell in a heavy wave over her shoulders. She brushed it out slowly, shifting the part again and again until the strands nearly hid the bruise. Then she put on big glasses, a shapeless light sweater, and loose jeans. A different woman stood in the mirror now. Not Margot. Rita. She opened her locker and pulled out an orange vest printed with staff, a worn baseball cap, and a work badge. She put the vest over the sweater, tucked her hair under the cap, took a plastic bucket, and dropped in a bottle of cleaning solution, a rag, and a folded mop. An older security guard was already waiting in the service corridor. Same as always? She nodded silently. Better skip the main entrance for now. There's a whole crowd out there. They'll clear out. They will. He opened a narrow metal door. Rita pushed a cart of trash bags ahead of her and calmly walked forward. By the main entrance, dozens of people were waiting for Margot. They're saying she's still inside. If I get a photo with her tonight, I'll have something to show my kids. Two guys with phones nearly collided with the girl in the staff vest. Sorry. They didn't even look up at her. A minute later, the vest, the badge, and the bucket were left behind in a small utility closet. An ordinary girl in glasses walked out of the building. People who minutes earlier had been chanting Margot's name walked right past her. Now, she was completely invisible to them. "Morning, Rita." "Morning." The library greeted her with the smell of old paper and familiar quiet. "New arrivals just came in. Want to shelve them?" "Of course." She shelved them quickly, straightening each row out of habit. An old man flipping through the same book he never checked out. A boy spending half an hour choosing a dinosaur encyclopedia. The ordinary rhythm of an ordinary afternoon. A few minutes before closing, a young woman rushed into the library. "Sorry, are you closing?" "Almost." "I need a book. I don't know which one, just something that makes things a little easier afterwards." Rita walked silently between the stacks. She came back with a thin volume and held it out. "The Bridge Beyond Forever." "Did it help you?" Rita's fingers lingered on the cover for a moment. "Once. A lot." The woman smiled gratefully and pressed the book to her chest. When the library emptied, Rita walked her familiar route toward the Riverwalk. Only there did she let herself be neither Rita nor Margot, just Margarita. An old bench between two lime trees, a little off the main path, waited for her almost every evening. In 10 years, she had never once found it taken. Tonight, for the first time, someone was already sitting on it. A stranger. Margarita instinctively slowed her steps. She was about to turn quietly and come back tomorrow, but right then the man looked up from his book. "Excuse me? Is this your spot?" She froze.
Part 2. The Bench. Margarita hesitated only a moment. Normally, she would have simply left. She'd come back tomorrow, a little earlier or a little later. This bench was the one place she could be herself, and she didn't want to share it with a stranger. But right then, the man looked up from his book. "Excuse me, is this your spot?" "No," she said quietly. "I just read here a lot." He smiled and immediately shifted closer to the edge of the bench. "Then I'm the one trespassing. If you don't mind, there's room enough for both of us." Margarita stood still for a few more seconds. Then she sat down anyway, leaving nearly 5 feet between them. Only then did she notice his bag sat exactly on the worn patch of paint at the end of the bench. Her spot, the one she'd chosen without thinking for 10 years, the one worn smooth under her own hand. She almost said something. She didn't. They both opened their books, and the park filled again with nothing but the rustle of pages and the quiet evening wind. A few minutes in, she caught herself glancing at her own side of the bench again. He noticed. "Is there something special about this spot?" "Not really." He smiled, not unkindly. That sounded like a lie. She didn't answer. He let it go and went back to his book as if he hadn't noticed anything at all. "Interesting choice," he said after a moment, nodding at her book. "For this day and age?" "Why's that?" "Because these days most people look for answers on their phones." She almost smiled. "And you?" He held up his own book. "Looks like I am hopelessly behind the times too." "And how's life among the hopelessly behind?" "Not bad so far. At least they still know how to keep quiet." Margarita laughed quietly. "That's a rare quality, especially today." He glanced down and caught her looking at his bag again. "Sorry, am I in your way?" He went to move it. "No," she said, a little too quickly. "It's fine." He studied her for a second longer than the moment needed, as if he'd noticed something he couldn't quite name, then let it go. They fell silent again. Strangely, the silence didn't ask to be explained. Each read their own book, and at the same time both seemed to be listening to the other's presence. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and his smile vanished instantly. "Sorry, work." He stood. "I hope we'll run into each other again." Margarita only nodded. He walked quickly down the path, already answering the call, and she watched him go for a long time. The book stayed open on the same page. The next morning, Rita came to the library earlier than anyone. She loved this hour, when the city was just waking up and the reading room was still silent. She was returning books to the shelves, straightening their spines out of habit, and caught herself thinking about yesterday's conversation. The bell over the door chimed. She looked up. The same man stood in the doorway. "Morning." "Morning." He smiled. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I work here." "Now it makes sense why you love paper books so much." "Looking for anything in particular?" "Honestly, not yet." "That's the most dangerous answer you can give in a library. Now I'll be the one choosing." "And do readers usually end up satisfied?" "So far, no one's come back to complain." "That's already a good sign." She walked slowly along the shelves. "Do you like mysteries?" "I get enough of those at work." "Then something completely different." "Like what?" "Something that makes you stop thinking about everything else for even a little while." He smiled. "If you find a book like that, I'll become your regular." "Careful with promises like that. We remember them." "All of them?" "Almost, especially the ones who return books on time." "So I still have a shot at a good reputation?" "Theoretically, yes." They both smiled, but right then the phone rang sharply. He glanced at the screen. The smile vanished instantly. "Yes, understood. On my way." He quickly put the phone back in his pocket. "Sorry, looks like good books lost to work again." "They're patient. They'll wait." "I hope librarians are too." He nodded goodbye and hurried to the exit. Only after the door closed did Margarita notice a plastic card left on the counter, dropped when he reached for his phone. She picked it up on instinct, meaning to catch up with him. His photo was on it. Below it, a name, Danny Kane, and below that, in small print, Detective, Major Crimes Division, City Police Department. Margarita slowly set the card down on the counter. A cop. The one thing that was never supposed to happen in her life.
Part 3. The Girl in a Cap. A cop. The one thing that was never supposed to happen in her life. All day, Margarita worked as usual. She smiled at patrons, took back returned books, helped kids find the right encyclopedia. On the surface, nothing had changed, but the moment she was alone for even a minute, the badge rose up in front of her eyes again. She knew only one thing: she couldn't go back to the bench. The next evening, she deliberately turned the other way. She took the long route, bought a coffee, wandered the city aimlessly for a while. She got home almost right away and felt a strange emptiness. That went on for 3 days. On the 4th, she caught herself standing at the entrance to the familiar path. "Just to see if anyone's there," she said quietly to herself. Danny was already sitting on the bench. Seeing her, he smiled as if he'd been certain she'd come. "I was starting to think I'd offended you." "No, just a lot of work." "The library's open till 9 at night?" Margarita laughed. "No. So it's not work after all." She didn't answer. Danny held out a paper cup. "This time I decided to risk it again. And if you hadn't come, I'd have drunk both coffees. Questionable plan, but simple." She sat down next to him. This time there was much less space between them than the first time. They talked for a long while about books, about trips, about cities neither of them had ever seen. Danny told her that as a kid he'd dreamed of being an archaeologist, and Margarita admitted she'd always wanted to see Scotland, not for the castles, but for the old libraries. "That's a very unusual wish," he smiled. "I hear that a lot. I like it, though." A short silence fell. "Can I ask something personal?" she asked quietly. "Depends on the question." "Why did you become a cop?" Danny was quiet for a few seconds. "A long time ago, I couldn't protect someone very close to me." He was looking straight ahead, as if he were seeing not the river, but a different evening entirely. "Since then, I try to make it there in time, at least sometimes." Margarita didn't press further. She suddenly wanted very badly to just take his hand, but she didn't dare. That same night, walking home through the back entrance, she'd nearly opened the door when a sharp scream came from the street. Margarita froze. No, not tonight. She closed her eyes. The scream came again. A minute later, Margot was already running down the dark alley. By the bus stop, 2 men were holding a young woman. One had a hand over her mouth. The other was trying to drag her around the corner of a building. The first one didn't even register where the punch came from. The second only managed to swing once. Margot moved fast and silent. Step, slip, strike, another. In seconds, both were on the asphalt, not understanding what had happened. The girl was shaking. "Thank you. Who are you?" Margot only shook her head. "Go." "But now." The girl took off running. Margot watched her go for one more second, then vanished into the dark just as fast as she'd appeared. 10 minutes later, patrol cars pulled up to the alley. Danny listened carefully to the shaken girl. "Did you see her face?" "No, she had a cap and a mask on." "Can you describe her?" "She's short and really fast." One of the attackers sitting by the ambulance laughed nervously. "That wasn't a person." Danny looked at him. "Then who?" The man swallowed. "I don't know." He looked down. "But she fought like an animal." Danny closed his notebook without a word. For some reason, those were the words that stuck with him most. Walking the last stretch home, Margarita passed a black car idling at the curb, engine running, windows dark. She didn't look twice. She told herself it was nothing. She was almost right, and the next evening he'd be meeting the quiet librarian Margarita on the bench, without the faintest idea that he'd spent the whole night looking for the same person. Part 4. Ready?
The next evening, Danny arrived a little early. The book sat beside him, but he barely read. His thoughts kept circling back to the attack that night. The girl in the cap. A few seconds of fighting. Not a single trace. Just terrified witnesses describing her as if she'd stepped out of the dark and dissolved back into it. "Waiting long?" a familiar voice asked. Margarita stood beside him, holding 2 thin books. "About 10 minutes. No need." There was a need. She sat down and set one book between them. "This is for you. Didn't you say librarians hate parting with books? I do, but I hate it even more when good books go unread." He smiled and ran his fingers over the cover. "So I've been trusted with something valuable?" "Just a book for now." "That's already a lot." They talked for a long time, about childhood dreams, about cities they'd never been to, about the smell of old libraries, and about how sometimes a book remembers a person better than a person remembers a book. As it started to get dark, Danny held the book back out to her. "Finished already?" Margarita said, surprised. "No." "You didn't like it?" "The opposite. If I finish it now, I won't have a reason to come back to the library." Margarita couldn't hold back a laugh. "That's the strangest excuse I've ever heard from a reader." "So you'll let me keep it a few more days?" She thought for a moment, then set the book back in his lap. "Fine, on one condition." "Which is?" "When you finish it, don't tell me the plot." "Then what?" "Tell me what it changed in you." Danny looked at her carefully. "Deal." They stood up almost at the same time. Saying goodbye, Margarita suddenly realized she wasn't thinking about how quickly she could be alone again. For the first time in years, she wanted this walk to last just a few minutes longer. And that was exactly what scared her. The next day, her training was worse than it had ever been. She took a hit, then another. Her coach waited out the round, handed her a towel without a word, and only asked, "Ready?" Margarita understood right away what he meant. Not about training, not about the next fight, about what had been happening to her these past few weeks. She didn't answer. Her coach nodded as if he'd heard one anyway. "Then that's enough for today." She silently started pulling off her gloves. "You know what's most valuable in a good fighter?" Margarita shook her head. "Not speed, not power, not even wins." He paused for a moment. "The most valuable thing is when a person remembers what they step into the cage for, and even more important, when they understand what would let them stop stepping into it one day." Margarita lowered her eyes. She'd never expected to hear something like that from him. That same evening, Margarita was walking home. She was a few dozen yards from the back entrance when a black car quietly pulled to the curb. A man in his 50s stepped out, an expensive coat, an unhurried walk, a polite smile. She recognized him instantly. The world seemed to go quiet. "Good evening, Margarita," he said, as if they'd parted only yesterday. Everything inside her went cold. "You have the wrong person." "Do I?" The man studied her face carefully. "People change a great deal, but the eyes almost never." She stayed silent. "Don't worry," he said in the same calm voice. "I just wanted to make sure you were alive." Margarita took a slow step back. "We don't know each other." "Of course," he agreed easily, "and let's leave it at that for now." The man turned back to the car as if the conversation had been perfectly ordinary. Before getting in, he looked at her once more. "Give my regards to the girl in the cap." The car pulled away slowly. Margarita stood frozen for a long time. He knew. Not suspected, not guessed, knew. For the first time in years, she felt real fear, not for herself, for Danny. Because if the past could find her, sooner or later it would find the one person beside whom she'd finally stopped feeling alone.
Part 5.
the past. After that encounter, Margarita stopped coming to the bench. The first evening, Danny thought she'd been held up at work. The second, that she might be sick. By the third day, he caught himself scanning every woman in a light-colored sweater. The bench stayed empty. He'd open the book she'd given him, read a few pages, and look again at the path between the old lime trees. Margarita didn't come. She, meanwhile, barely left her apartment. Just the library, just training, and straight home. Now, even the back entrance didn't feel safe. Every time, before opening the door, she'd listen for a few seconds, then carefully peek into the courtyard. Only once she was sure no one was there would she quickly cross to the building. The past she'd been running from for over 10 years was no longer a memory. It was walking the same city streets. On the third day, Danny came to the library. Not to speak to her, not even to look at her, not directly. He walked the aisles the way any patron might, unhurried, and stopped at the returns cart nearest the front desk. He picked up the top book, the one Rita had shelved not 10 minutes before, turned it over once in his hands, and set it back down, slightly askew. Then he walked out. Rita smiled at the next patron, checked out 2 books, answered a question about the returns policy. Only after the last reader left did she walk to the cart. Her hands weren't steady anymore. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't needed to. On the 4th day, Danny came to the library. "Afternoon," he smiled. Margarita looked up and froze for a second. "Afternoon. You disappeared." She pretended to straighten books on the shelf. "There's been a lot going on." "That much?" "It happens." He studied her carefully. "I was starting to worry." Margarita wanted to answer but couldn't. No one had said words like that to her in a very long time. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For making you worry." Danny only smiled. "Then come tonight." She lowered her eyes. "I don't know. I'll be waiting." He didn't say anything else. He just left. She came anyway that evening. Danny was sitting in the usual spot. Seeing her, he didn't ask a single question. He just made room. "Thanks for coming." They were quiet for a long time. Margarita looked at the river. "You know, sometimes it feels like a person can run anywhere." "But not from themselves?" She shook her head. "From the past." Danny answered quietly. "If it's real, it catches up eventually." She turned to him. "How do you know that?" He silenced for a long time. "Because I ran, too." "From what?" "From guilt." A silence fell. "Years ago, my sister was attacked. I was right there. I fought off several of them at once. I thought I'd made it in time. I hadn't." He lowered his head. "She died on the way to the hospital." His hand drifted, without him noticing, to a thin white scar along his knuckles, the kind that never quite fades. He didn't seem to know he was touching it. Rita did. Something in her went cold. She knew this story. Not all of it, but enough. That night she'd been there too. A terrified girl who'd run away while some boy she'd never seen held off the attackers. She'd never seen his face, only remembered the scream and the girl left lying on the pavement. For a second, the 2 of them stopped being 2 people on a bench. The years peeled back. A dark alley, a boy's voice telling her to run, not chasing after her, staying between her and the men who wanted her. She'd never turned around. She'd never known his name. Her heart was pounding. It couldn't be. No, it couldn't be him. Walking home, Margarita barely felt the ground beneath her. That night played over and over in front of her eyes. She'd run, cried, never looked back, and somewhere behind her, the screams had gone on for a long time. For years, she'd been certain she'd simply survived, and only now, for the first time, she thought, maybe someone had paid too high a price for that. In her apartment, she sat in the dark for a long time. Then she walked to the mirror, slowly pushed her hair aside. The scar she'd hidden from the world for years hadn't gone anywhere. "Enough," she whispered. For the first time, that word wasn't meant to an opponent. It was meant to herself. She didn't want to live 3 separate lives anymore. But it wasn't discovery she feared anymore. It was the moment after, watching his face change once he understood, and the look he'd give her afterwards, the one she wouldn't be able to unsee. And right at that moment, her phone buzzed quietly. The number was blocked. Margarita didn't answer directly. "Hello?" A familiar, calm voice came through the line. "Good evening, Margarita. I told you we'd see each other again."
Part 6. There's still room here. Good evening, Margarita. I told you we'd see each other again. She slowly set the phone down. There was no more doubt now. He hadn't just recognized her. He'd started hunting. The next day, Margarita went neither to the library nor to training. For the first time in years, she was neither Rita nor Margot. She just sat by the window and watched the evening slowly begin outside the glass. Around 7, there was a quiet knock at the door. Danny stood on the doorstep. "You didn't come to work." "How do you know?" "I stopped by to return the book." He smiled. "They told me the librarian was sick." Margarita stepped back silently, inviting him in. The apartment was quiet. Books, flowers on the windowsill, a cup of cold tea, not a single thing out of place. Danny sat down across from her. "Something happen?" Margarita was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "I don't want to live in pieces anymore." She told him everything, about music school, about the boys who taught her to fear people, about the basement gym, about Margot, about the attack years ago, about the scar, about Rita, about the back entrance she'd used for years so no one would ever meet her 2 lives at once, and finally about that night. "I was the one who ran that night." Her voice shook. "I thought I was running for help, but I never went back." Danny said nothing, for so long that Margarita stopped breathing. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the evening city for a few seconds. Then he asked quietly, "Do you remember who they were attacking that night?" "No." "My sister." Margarita closed her eyes. Tears came on their own. "I'm sorry." "Don't." She looked up, startled. Danny turned back to her. "All my life, I thought I'd failed to save my sister." He gave a sad smile. "And this whole time you thought you were the one who ran." He sat down beside her, carefully took her hand. He turned it over gently, and without a word, brushed his thumb once across his own knuckles, the same scar she'd noticed on the bench that first night. "You have one too, don't you?" he said, not a question. Margarita didn't answer. She didn't have to. "We both lived with a lie." Margarita stopped holding back the tears. You don't hate me?" Danny shook his head. "No." He gripped her hand tighter. "You survived. So I managed to save someone that night after all." Someone knocked at the door unexpectedly. Danny got up calmly. "Stay here." But when they stepped out of the building, the familiar black car was already parked at the curb. Beside it stood the same man, expensive coat, calm smile, as if they'd simply run into each other by chance.
"Finally stopped hiding," he said. For the first time, Margarita didn't look away. "Yes. You knew I'd get tired of running one day." "No." She stepped forward. "You're the one who's been living in the past this whole time." The smile on his face faded slightly. He slowly pulled out a knife. Danny immediately stepped between them. At that exact moment, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the building. The man glanced back briefly, then set the knife down on the hood himself. "Think she'll stop looking over her shoulder now?" Margarita answered calmly, "Already have." The officers cuffed him without a word. He didn't say anything else. Weeks passed. Margarita slowly closed the door of her apartment. She paused for a moment by the back entrance, the one she and Margot had used for years. She smiled, locked the door, and walked out the front entrance for the first time. Danny was already waiting outside the building. Together they walked in silence to the Riverwalk. The bench between the 2 lime trees was empty. Danny sat down and shifted a little over. "There's still room here." Margarita sat beside him, not looking over her shoulder, not hiding her face behind her hair. For the first time in years, she wasn't the girl who vanished in a crowd, and she wasn't the fighter behind the glass, and she wasn't the quiet librarian who kept everyone else's secrets on the shelves. She was just Margarita, all 3 of them, finally sitting in the same place, in the same skin, on the same bench. Danny opened the book she'd once given him, found the bookmark, and smiled. "You know." "What?" "I think I finally figured out what this book changed in me." "And what's that?" He closed the book. "It didn't just lead me to you. It led me to all of you. Rita, Margot, Margarita." He looked at her. "I think I've loved all 3. I just didn't know it yet." Margarita didn't answer. She just squeezed her hand tighter. The sun slowly sunk over the river, and for the first time, none of her lives had anywhere left to hide.